She wakes up alone, not in a panic, not in grief, but in peace. No alarm, no footsteps down the hall, no voice calling her name, just stillness. The world sees her and whispers alone, but she doesn't flinch, she doesn't explain, because she knows something that most people don't, that silence can be sacred, that solitude can be strength. Society still ties a woman's worth to her attachments, wife, mother, lover. Even now, in 2025, people ask, don't you feel lonely? As if her life must orbit someone else's to be meaningful, as if self-possession is a sin. But what if she isn't alone because she failed to find someone? What if she walks alone because she finally found herself? The Stoics would nod in quiet agreement. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that very little is needed to make a happy life. But the modern world has made us forget. It taught women that fulfillment comes from being chosen. That value is proven by being needed. And that wholeness arrives when someone else says, "You complete me." But the woman who chooses solitude knows a different kind of completion. Not one granted, one earned. She doesn't chase love, but she isn't close to it either. She doesn't harden, she haunts. And in the space the world calls empty, she builds something invisible. A quiet strength, an inner calm, a life not reactive, but rooted. This isn't a story of bitterness or isolation. It's the story of becoming, of walking away, not from love, but from the lie that she needed to be less to be loved. The Stoic woman does not shout her independence, she simply lives it. She doesn't need applause to feel whole. She doesn't fear silence, she listens to it. Because in that silence, she meets the one person she had been avoiding all along, herself. And that meeting changes everything. She didn't always feel strong. In fact, in the beginning, she felt like she was breaking. The first nights alone were loud with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it haunts. Memories echoed through the walls. Her mind replayed old scenes. Was I too much, too distant, too demanding, too free? You see, this is the moment most people never talk about. When solitude isn't empowerment yet. When it still feels like loss. Not the loss of a person, but the loss of who she used to be with them. This is where the Stoic path and Jungian depth meet. She must now face what the world never prepared her for, the confrontation with herself. The Stoics taught that no one is your master unless you allow them to be. But for years, her sense of self was quietly shaped by others. What to wear, how to speak, when to stay silent. She didn't call it control, she called it love. She didn't call it abandonment, she called it compromise. But now in the stillness, those distortions rise to the surface. Jung would call this the shadow, the hidden parts of herself that she suppressed to survive, the parts that were too bold, too angry, too ambitious, too wild. The very traits she once dimmed now demand to be seen. And here's the paradox. As she begins to reclaim them, she also begins to feel guilt. Because society told her, directly or indirectly, that a good woman bends, that a respectable woman waits, that a whole woman must always be half of something else. But Stoicism says otherwise. It says that your character, not your relationship status, defines your worth, that the highest good is virtue, not validation, and that peace does not come from pleasing others, but from living in alignment with your own values. So she starts asking different questions, not how do I make them stay, but what am I staying true to? And the answers are uncomfortable at first, because they demand change. They demand self-honesty. They demand courage, not the kind that fights wars, but the kind that says no more to self-abandonment. The woman who walks alone does not escape pain, she walks through it. And that's what makes her powerful. Solitude changes her, not overnight, not all at once, but slowly, like a tide reshaping the shore. She begins to notice something new in herself, a quiet decisiveness, a voice that no longer asks for permission, a sense of direction that doesn't depend on others to validate it. At first, it surprises her. She used to hesitate before every decision, waiting for reassurance, agreement, someone else's okay. Now she listens inward, and the voice she hears is firm, clear, steady. Carl Jung called this inner force the animus, the unconscious masculine within every woman. It is the part of her that reasons, decides, leads. And in most lives it sleeps, until solitude wakes it up. In the past, she projected this part of herself onto others. She dated men for their confidence, not realizing it was the confidence she lacked in herself. She admired decisiveness in others, not knowing she had silenced it in her own soul. But now, she has no one to lean on. And that's the gift. She must become what she once sought. The Stoics would say this is self-mastery, the ability to govern your impulses, to choose with clarity, to stand rooted no matter how loud the world becomes. And that's exactly what's happening. She begins to organize her own finances. She fixes what's broken without calling for help. She walks into rooms without shrinking, not because she wants to be masculine, but because she no longer wants to be dependent on anyone to feel whole. This is not the rejection of men, it's the return of balance. For the first time, she is integrating what she disowned, but the world doesn't see it that way. They say she's too independent. They call her hard to love, as if softness is her only acceptable strength. But she knows better now. She knows that true femininity is not fragile. It's not defined by compliance, nor diminished by power. She no longer waits for a man to choose her, because she has already chosen herself. And in doing so, she becomes whole, not because someone completed her, but because she reclaimed the parts she once gave away. Not everything about being alone is beautiful. Sometimes it's brutal. There are days when the silence feels like a scream, nights when her mind replays every failure, mornings when she wonders if she made a mistake. No one posts about these parts, the aching quiet, the social invitations that never arrive, the birthdays with empty chairs, the well-meaning relatives who ask with tilted heads, "Still single?" This is the shadow, not the loneliness itself, but what it awakens in her. Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we reject or hide. And now, without distraction, hers have come to the surface. The fear of being forgotten, the bitterness she never voiced, the shame she absorbed from a world that called her too much, and not enough in the same breath. The Stoics knew this terrain well. They taught that suffering is not in the event, but in our judgment of it. And here, alone with her thoughts, she finally sees which judgments were never hers to carry. She remembers being told, "Be quieter. Don't scare men away. You'll regret not settling down." Each message planted like a weed in her mind, each doubt whispering, "You are only valuable when chosen." But now she sees them for what they are: cultural noise, inherited fear, chains dressed as advice. And here's the truth she uncovers: even independence can become a shield, a mask, if used to avoid vulnerability, because real strength isn't in never needing anyone. It's in knowing you could walk alone, but choosing connection from fullness, not from fear. So she learns to soften without collapsing, to be open without becoming dependent, to let herself be seen, even when the voice in her head says hide. And when shame tries to speak again, she meets it with the most stoic of responses: a deep breath, a clear mind, a calm refusal to believe it. The shadow no longer scares her, because she's learning to hold it, not with judgment, but with compassion, not to become perfect, but to become whole. This is not the part of the journey most people celebrate, but it is the part that transforms her. There was a time she thought being a woman meant being chosen, to be delicate, accommodating, to smile even when her heart was burning, to stay even when her soul wanted to run. She confused femininity with approval, mistook softness for submission, believed her beauty was her worth. But solitude stripped away the roles. No more performing, no more pleasing, just presence. And in that raw space, she met a version of womanhood she never knew was possible. It didn't come from a mirror. It didn't come from a man. It came from within, from listening to the still voice beneath the noise of expectation. Jung said the feminine is not about appearance. It is intuition, depth, the ability to hold paradox, to be strong and soft, sharp and kind, independent and deeply feeling. And the Stoics would agree. They never defined virtue by gender. They defined it by character, by reason, by courage, by living in accordance with nature. And a woman's nature, she now sees, is not to conform, but to connect with her truth. So she stops apologizing for her edges. She stops shrinking to fit into boxes never meant for her shape. She wears solitude like silk, not as a statement, but as a reflection of the richness she has built inside. She no longer asks, "Am I enough?" She asks, "Am I aligned? Am I at peace with who I am, even when no one is watching?" Because that's the kind of femininity no one can take from her. She becomes her own archetype, not the damsel, not the martyr, not the muse, but the oracle, the grounded one, the woman who knows, who listens, who waits, not for rescue, but for resonance. And if love comes, it is not to complete her, it is to walk beside her, as an equal, nothing more, nothing less. She is no longer afraid of her own depth. She dwells in it, she thrives in it, she becomes it. She no longer fears being alone, because now she understands solitude was never a punishment. It was a path, a sacred space where the noise faded and the truth could finally be heard. She used to fill her days with distraction, dates, dinners, doing, but none of it touched the ache inside. Now she lights a candle, not for someone else, for herself. She cooks dinner and sets the table for one, not out of sadness, but reverence. She walks through the city, headphones in, and feels not empty, but untethered, free from needing to be seen to believe she exists. The world might still misunderstand her, might still label her as incomplete, but she no longer lives for the world's understanding. She lives for something quieter, truer, her own alignment. The Stoics believe that freedom begins the moment you stop depending on external things for inner peace, and that is exactly what she has done. She has stopped chasing what she cannot control: approval, timing, the opinions of those who never truly saw her. And she has turned inward, not to escape the world, but to meet herself without masks. The shadow, the animus, the feminine, the stillness, she no longer fights them. She integrates them. Because true individuation, as Jung taught, is not becoming someone new, but becoming who you've always been, beneath the layers. She is not waiting anymore, not for a partner, not for permission, not for the world to tell her who she is. She is becoming, quietly, powerfully, on her own terms. And perhaps the most radical act of all, she's learning to love the woman she meets in the mirror, not because she's perfect, but because she is whole. Final words: the woman who walks alone is not lost. She is walking home to herself.